Great. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the Dublin Buddhist Centre if you haven't been here before, and welcome back if you have been. My name is Dharmachari and I'm the chair of the Dublin Buddhist Centre. And welcome all to those who are online who are joining us. This is a hybrid event, so we're having people joining us online as well. So my job is a very nice job this evening is to introduce this lovely gentleman who's sitting here, Dayasagara, who's going to be giving us a talk tonight. And just to say a little bit about Dayasagara, not too much because I'm going to hand over to him and hear about what he has to say. Dayasagara was for about 10 years the RTE, let me get this right, News and Current Affairs Europe correspondent. He also worked for RTE News 6-1, and he was a co-presenter of Prime Time. And then he also worked for Lyric FM. So he's a very prestigious career in broadcasting. But he's also been involved in, he's learned to meditate in the mid-90s. And he first came across our community in the UK at a retreat centre, a men's retreat centre called Padmaloka, where he came across that, and then he quickly became involved in our centre here in Dublin as well. And in 2018, he joined our order, and he's given the name Dayasagara, which means ocean of kindness. A very apt name for Dayasagara. He's a really lovely, warm, friendly, welcoming person. And I'm sure you'll get a sense of that when he's during his talk. He's also been very interested in the arts since he was a teenager, and that interest is carried into his spiritual life as well. So in a way, it's really apt that he's giving this talk, which is exploring the relationship between Buddhism and the arts. Sharing his reflections on artistic activity and Buddhist spiritual practice and how they've influenced each other in the West. And in a way, the importance of the arts is one of, I suppose, our particular Buddhist community's distinctive emphasis, if you like. And I met Dayasagara a couple of weeks ago, and he was just really bringing home to me just how unusual that is in the Buddhist world. You know, so I'm sure he's going to say a bit more about that. But I just want to hand over now to Dayasagara for I'm sure it'll be a really wonderful talk. So thank you.
Thanks, Dayasagara. I did ask you to keep it short.
It's short.
Shorter would it be? Well, thank you for those very kind words. To get my bearings, I haven't been in this room with a crowd, as I say, for 2.5 years. So make allowances. I'm going through something here. There's a line it's in Waiting for Godot, isn't it? Something is taking its course. If anyone knows the play really well, they'll know. It's easier to start with somebody else's words. This is a poem called Try to Praise the Mutilated World, which you may or may not know. It appeared in the New Yorker magazine a few days, less than a week, after the attack on the Twin Towers in September 2001. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of rosé wine, the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees going nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world, and the grey feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes. and returns. I'll talk about the poem in a minute, but this is the point of departure. This silence and your attention. You see what happened when I started trying to praise the mutilated world? You immediately entered into a relationship of trust of a kind, I suppose. Trust above all with the intention, with the poet, with the words. There was a kind of attention that the poem demanded, which you knew about, and you were prepared to give it. And you knew it probably, or could be, rewarded. An awful lot has been written by way of definitions of art. And that's all very worthwhile, but it would be a waste of our time to go into it too deeply here. I'm going to suggest that for the purposes of the next 45 minutes or so, we could take that as our idea of what art is, the making of a work with the expectation that it will be given a certain kind of attention and that attention will be somehow rewarded. We could do better. There are other definitions, but if we just keep it at that, that gets me over an awful lot of distractions and cul-de-sac where we could get into what did the artist have in mind, what did he intend to communicate, what did she intend to express. No, it's just that. It's just somebody making something to be received in a certain way. The word is appreciation. I don't like the word appreciation very much. I used to get asked to give talks on music appreciation. I thought the notion was deadly. There's an idea of you should be responding in a certain way. I want to keep away from that. So it's just that. It's an object, a piece of work, which is made in a certain way with the expectation that it can be received in a certain way, and which rewards the recipient, or is intended to reward the recipient. So when I started off, you all went beautifully silent. And there's a friend of ours, Sangashura, who says, I can't tell jokes, but I love telling them in Buddhist company. I know not everyone here is a Buddhist, but I love telling them in Buddhist company because they always laugh. Yeah, he said, and I like to have a go. So I like to have a go, and I'm always I'm grateful for the silence, and the silence was a lovely one. And the feeling of receptiveness. If not everyone here is a Buddhist, you have the receptiveness as a body. And we have it as a body, must have it as individuals, which is half the battle, to use an ancient Buddhist term. I've lost my thread. If I had started off, there once was a man in Nantucket, your attention would have been totally different. And that's the difference between a work of art and a limerick. And I'll keep the suspense going by having you wonder whether I will ever, in a Buddhist shrine room, complete the limerick that begins, there was a young man. I know there once was a man in Nantucket. So that's the ground rules. The other thing I have to admit from the start is that when I laid out for Siddhayasihi many months ago what this talk was going to be about, I did put rather more stress on, or a bit of stress on tracing the influence that the arts and Buddhism have had on each other. There isn't actually much of that. I can't actually remember if there's any of it. I am much more interested. And if I had, console yourselves that if I had gone into that, it would have been very boring indeed, because what interests me and what seems important is, and what's always important in spiritual practice, any spiritual practice, and in art and literature and the rest of it, is where do we go from here? What can we do with it now. History may help us in that, but I'm much more concerned to look at the possibilities that are offered to us by art and Buddhism and the possibilities that they offer each other, if that's what it turns out to have been about in half an hour or more from now. Art and religion have always gone hand in hand. I think I'm safe in saying that, right from the earliest cave paintings. They were always objects that somehow, think of the hand on a rock in a prehistoric cave, where the artist, if that's what he was, or priest, if that's what she was, we don't know. The hand was placed there. The pigment was chewed and blown over the hand, and then the hand is taken away and the imprint is left on the rock. Was that art? Was it religion? Or were they one and the same thing? Statement of, we are here. I am here. I take the hand away, and is what's left a statement of my presence or of my absence? That's not my analysis. That's Anthony Gormley, the sculptor. I think it's lovely. As a pointer, as good a pointer as I've heard to what they were about in the beginning, when they drew the hunting scenes and all the rest in Lascaux and the other places. The art apparently goes back to the Neanderthals. We think we have a majority on it. We think we were destined from the beginning to be the master species. Apparently it could have gone the other way if there hadn't been a bad winter in Siberia. The Neanderthals might be giving a much better talk here. So I don't want to go speculating too much about the origins or nature of art. I'm more interested in where we find ourselves today in relation to the arts and spiritual life, and in how those two aspects can be better integrated and maybe even be one and the same. I'm not going to come up with the answer to that, but what I say may allow us all maybe to go away and reflect and find the way that they might come together for us. From a Buddhist point of view, the deepening and broadening of awareness, the cultivation of more complete awareness is the most obvious meeting point for the arts and spiritual life. In fact, my favorite definition of Buddhism comes from Urgyen Sangharakshita, the founder of the Triratna Buddhist order, who said, if I remember correctly, what Buddhism is about is the cultivation of the deepest, broadest, most complete awareness. That's what Buddhism is. Full stop. He went on to say that awareness has two principal aspects: the aspect of wisdom and the aspect of compassion. And then, rather endearingly, before going on with his talk, he said, "So much for a definition of Buddhism." It's pretty good. It has served me well. And until someone gives me a good reason, I'll stick with it. I'll say a bit more. I will come back to relating the arts to Buddhist practice, but I'd rather keep a wider perspective for the moment. Going back to Zagajewski's poem, it was written in Polish sometime before 9/11, but the editors of The New Yorker chose it for their first issue, as I say, published within a week of the attack on the Twin Towers. And you can imagine the editors, or I don't know how factual this is, but I like to imagine the editors coming out of Times Square, the poetry editor of the New Yorker, coming out of the subway at Times Square to go to the offices at number 4, making his way through his or her, I don't know who it was, through the dust, intent on this formidable task of finding words equal to the occasion. And if I allow my fancy to roam a little more, I can imagine the pastor of Times Square Church, the interdenominational church, diagonally at the other end of Times Square. I can imagine him coming out of the subway and pondering the words of his homily. And that's church, and literature, poet and pastor, really on uncommon ground. The dividing line between the secular and the sacred is not as clear-cut, not nearly as clear-cut as we might assume, as we tend to assume. It is a curious fact that so much religious music, great religious music, has been written by atheists, non-believers, agnostics, or people who at least didn't follow any conventional form of belief. Brahms' Requiem, Berlioz's Childhood of Christ, Verdi's Requiem, the Missa Solemnis of Beethoven, works, and many, many more of these works were written and have given great devotional inspiration to to countless people, even though, as my mother used to say, the people who wrote them never darkened the door of a church, or rarely so. But there's no real mystery in that, I think, because what related these great composers to the forms, if you like, of church music and the forms of religious belief was their great humanity, deep humanity, which enabled them to cut right through to the need, the great human need for what it is that we go to religion for, what brings us to belief. They may not have shared the belief or the practice of the churchgoers or whatever, but the need. They were tuned into the need, tuned in more deeply than us ordinary mortals are. In the play Amadeus by Peter Schaffer, which has dated in many ways, it's the one about Mozart and Salieri in the court in Vienna, from which Miłosz Forman made a movie. But the movie is no good, really. It's not compared to the play. The play is brilliant. He edited the script, wrecked it for me anyway, because he messed around with this script, with this passage. Mozart in the play is portrayed as a delinquent. No redeeming features at all. A foul-mouthed teenager, full stop. No, absolutely. Nothing to recommend him except the fact that he writes this great music, which is the mystery. And Salieri is the God-fearing, devout court composer who hears the music of Mozart, the Serenade for Wind Instruments, the Grand Partita, that's her name, and is immediately devastated because he realizes that God has favored this delinquent over him. And there's this wonderful speech, which I love, where he addresses God. Alone on stage, he addresses God and he says, "What is this pain in the music? What is this need in the sound? Forever unfulfillable, yet fulfilling him who hears it utterly." And he asks God, is it your need? Is it yours? The need at the very heart of things. For Salieri, it's the need of the deity himself, or as the play implies, 20th century play, and as Mozart's music conveys, the need that lies deep in our human experience. Whether we're believers or non-believers, composers or poets, or none of the above. The need that lies so deep that Salieri has no words to say what it is for, except to say that it's God's own need. And Mozart, of course, doesn't need any words to express it. For the purposes of the play, and it's not historical, it's gross liberties with actuality as far as I know, Salieri is the believer and Mozart just doesn't function at that level. He's the secular, profane being who yet has access to the transcendental. And that's an idea with huge appeal. As I say, this was written in the 20th century, late 20th century. It has huge appeal for an age such as ours, in which we've been told that God is dead, but in which the need for, call it God for the moment, is meant, the need that God was meant to fulfill is still there. In Zagajewski's poem, the need is expressed in a succession of images of things lost or obliterated or abandoned. The nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. In terms of a world that seems to have failed, the refugees going nowhere, a world that seems to have turned out all wrong, the executioners singing joyfully, a world mutilated. But, and this is why the poem was chosen by the genius poetry editor of the New Yorker, it's a poem of hope. And that hope is based on calling particular moments of experience to mind, the moment we were together in the room, the moment of gathering acorns, and so on. The moment when the music struck up or one was in touch with the earth. There are lots of those in literature, from Wordsworth and from Wordsworth onwards. Moments of ordinary experience which somehow reach deep into our being and mysteriously carry significance. Wordsworth would have called them, he did call them spots of time, spots of time. James Joyce called them epiphanies. And they were the idea behind the story collection Dubliners. Moments which might probably do seem insignificant at the time, but turn out later in memory to have what Wordsworth called a renovating virtue, whence our minds are nourished and invisibly repaired. Zagajewski has another poem in which he describes one of his spots of time or epiphanies. The moment, mortal as you or I, was full of boundless, senseless, silly joy, as if it knew something we didn't. And from Wordsworth and Coleridge on, there's no end to those epiphanies in literature. From the taste of a Madeleine cake dipped in tea from Marcel Proust to Seamus Heaney's little pleasant splashes of the peeled potatoes dropping in the bucket of water in the poem Peeling Potatoes. He and his mother leaning in over the bucket, never closer in all their lives. Probably Wordsworth's own best known spot of time is in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. We all do it in school. I can't read the first verse without making it sound, it's too late for me to read the first verse without making it sound, I wandered lonely as a cloud. But he sees the daffodils, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Wordsworth's mind invisibly repaired. I can't get invisible mending out of my head. But he means repaired by an invisible process. I think of him, I'm not sure how sound this is, as the first great English poet, as the great English poet of the unconscious, the one who invented that connection with the unconscious in literature. We think James Joyce did it, but Joyce loved Wordsworth, and Joyce credited Wordsworth fully. As I say, nowadays, I use the word unconscious there, but that's us talking in the 20th century, talking after, 21st, talking after Freud, talking after a century in which the word unconscious and words about the unconscious have been bandied around the place and used too often, or at least too often unthinkingly, without a real recollection of the wonder of the word unconscious, of the idea of the unconscious. And for me, that the word unconscious at this stage is beyond redemption. It diminishes the sheer wonder of Wordsworth's inner eye and the great bliss it calls to mind. But Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Wordsworth's great friend, and collaborator, albeit in a sometimes difficult partnership, he was in no doubt about the wonder or the significance that a moment of time could bear. It wasn't simply that one thing might remind us of another. It wasn't a matter of mere analogy, the poet being able to compare the daffodils dancing to, compare them to what, I suppose, to all the happiness one has ever known. No, it wasn't a device like that. For Coleridge, Wordsworth's host of daffodils would have had a connection with a great reality. The dancing and happiness of that reality is invisible to us most of the time, but the memory of the daffodils could convey a sense of it, and the connection between the symbol, the daffodils, and this greater dimension of things wasn't a mere invention of the poet's mind. For in Coleridge's own case, as he wrote, when he had written of a quiet stream with all its eddies and the moonlight playing on them, as if they were ideas in the divine mind before the creation. When he wrote that, the connection with the primal creative mind was a real one, not a poetic device. He wrote, and this is a phrase I'll come back to, of the translucence of the eternal through and in the temporal. The symbol always partaking of the reality, which it renders intelligible. Such is the wonder of the inward eye, the great power of the imagination, of which in English literature, as I was saying, Wordsworth and Coleridge are the great prophets, I suppose. In Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the water snakes, early in the poem, this is one I always remember from school, I loved it, was, yes, slimy things did the very deep did rot, oh Christ, that ever this should be, yes, slimy things did crawl with legs upon the slimy sea. What I don't remember from school, and probably didn't have, is that at the end of the poem, the same sea snakes are utterly transformed when they're seen in moonlight. Moonlight seems to be a kind of medium of translucence for Coleridge. Completely transformed. Oh, happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. As Malcolm Guite has written, it is as though by seeing these creatures in the moonlight, he is given, however briefly, some notion of how God sees them. The translucence of the eternal through the temporal. Or we might say that for Coleridge, writing as he did from a devoutly Christian frame of reference, the spot in time, the epiphany, has the force of the sacred. Sacred may be a more useful expression for us. And it must have had the same force for Wordsworth, though he used different terms. His daffodils, recollected in tranquility, can still have the same force for us, I think. They can, provided we manage to unthink or get around the psychobabble of 100 years and go back to the sheer wonder of the mind and the imagination. Have psychology and science explain that away? Or might it be to the contrary, that the further we go into the science of the mind, the more the wonder grows? Now, I'm aware that there's been very little Buddhism in this so far, but that's deliberate. I'm going to make up for that. But before I go on, does anyone want to ask anything? Any objections? Grounds for walking out? All right. Okay. Yeah, we've dwell on Buddhist practice for a while. I'm going to talk now as though nobody in this room is a Buddhist, and I'm trying to explain it to you all. Awesome task. I'm trying to teach my grandmother to suck eggs, and he's sitting in the back there. But it's actually quite a useful exercise for me. It's quite a useful exercise for me to have to go back and say, well, it's like this. Fundamental to Buddhist philosophy is the belief that our understanding of ourselves and our experience is flawed because it's in our nature to think of ourselves as fixed entities. And we also think of ourselves as perceiving objects that exist independently in the same way that we do. Independent us, perceiving independent that. But when we go looking, when we meditate or reflect, we go looking for our own fixed entity, we can't find it. Instead, we find that the mind is constantly changing, the consciousness ebbing and flowing, never standing still, constantly changing as the body is constantly changing. If we go looking for the essential core around which that change takes place, we just can't find it. We can't find the essential self. And we're no different from anything else. It's the same for the things we perceive as being outside of ourselves. They have no essential core to their being. That's a set of ideas that hangs fairly well together. It seems quite simple, but actually really grasping it is a life's work. It's probably several lifetimes' work. But I'll go a little further, if I can, with apologies to Sagramati. If it's not that nothing exists. Moment by moment, there is awareness of things existing. They just don't exist in the conveniently fixed way that we want them to, that we think they should. Our mind, this wonderful mind that, for better or worse, has enabled us to obliterate most of the species on the planet and take it over. This extraordinary mechanism does what it does and does it very, very well on the basis of seeing things as being there or not there. Just it needs that to function. And on that basis, it works very, very well. That is at least until quantum physics came along. And I'm rapidly getting out of my depth here, but as I understand it, quantum physics put it to us that if we want the microchips that keep everything going now, cars, the computers, the world, keep the world going now, if we want those, we have to accept a mathematics in which things can both be there and not be there. Because that's how the maths work, and we need the maths. And the maths make the microchips. The mathematics will build and run the computers that make the chips, and the sums that the mathematics do make sense to the machines, but they don't make sense to us. Something can't be there and not be there, does not compute, so to speak. Probably does compute, but it doesn't compute in here. To really grasp the vast flux of existence and non-existence of things passing away, even as they come into being, we would need a more complete awareness, the awareness of a Buddha, as Buddhists hold it. Until we develop that, we're kept going by this ultimately unsatisfactory, but brilliant conventional awareness that's based on assuming I am me, you are you, he and she are they, and it is it, and it will go on like that for as long as we need it to. We keep going on that basis, and it works very well up to a point, but it lets us down all the time, because things do not survive. The things we hold onto, grasp, and will insist on changing and dying, and we lose what we thought we had, including our precious self. And we suffer as a result. But we don't despair. We don't despair. For a long time, Buddhism, before the 20th century, until the early 20th century, Buddhism did suffer from being portrayed as misunderstood as a religion of beliefs. I call it a religion, and we won't get into that now, because that's something I love talking about, and we'd be here all night. Buddhism was misunderstood as being a system based on despair. But nothing could be further from the truth, because the point is we can grow in awareness. We can grow towards the awareness we need to take in the flux. Because every moment of our changing existence can be a change for the better in that respect. And we can afford ourselves at least a glimpse at our experience from somewhere closer to the point of view of a Buddha. We have moments of translucence, to use Coleridge's term. That's what keeps us going. That's how we practice, build on those. And that's where Buddhism meets Coleridge, moments of translucence, in the power of the imagination to afford us these moments of translucence, which guide us towards the fulfillment of ultimate awareness and the overcoming of suffering. And here's another great thing. We know those moments. We've experienced them. We may not have called them moments of translucence. Oh, I had a lovely translucent moment. No. We may not call them glimpses of ultimate reality. And at the time, Pache, as Wordsworth puts it so clearly, at the moment we're not aware of their significance, but we may have known them. We may have known them as he would have known the moment when he came upon the host of golden daffodils, as moments of beauty. And it's impossible not to quote Keats at this moment. I think I've done very well to hold off quoting Keats until now, and the inevitable line, but it's a great line, and so much revolves around it. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty, that is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. Interruption? No? Question? Chat? Okay. Oh. I want to talk a little bit about the way we approach this question of beauty, which in its particular emphasis in the Triratna Buddhist order and community. And in the way it's expounded by Sangharakshita, founder, it's art and beauty are very much go hand in hand. I don't think that's a problem. I think later on I might just stretch the definition of beauty a little to make it accommodate my notion of art. A little bit indulgent on my part, basically, but I think maybe we need to do it. As many people here know, an emphasis on art and the appreciation of beauty in the spiritual life. And as Dayasagara said before we began, it's one of the distinguishing features of the Triratna Buddhist order, a priority set by Sangharakshita. One of the initiatives that make him out, as I was saying to Dayasagara last week, for the radical that he was, because it's not in the tradition. It's really not in the tradition. There's plenty of beauty in the early texts, plenty of talk of one's spiritual practice as being beautiful, people being beautiful because they practice well and so on. But the idea of building a path to awareness, to full realization, to ultimate wisdom, the idea of building that, using our moments of beauty as stepping stones, path of beauty as we refer to it, that's Sangharakshita. I mean, others, I'm not saying nobody else ever came up with it, but I haven't seen them come up with it, not seen anyone pursue it in that way. And that came out of his reading of Coleridge in the first place. And ultimately, later, I assume later, but certainly both he and Coleridge go back to Plato, Athenian philosopher who lived, I think, about a century after the Buddha. It's a separate lineage, if you like, or separate line of influence, which Sangharakshita took up without hesitation, with great certainty, absolutely, because it was, in the first place, it was in line with the spirit of the Buddha's teaching, in which he was, even at the age of 27, when he started developing these ideas, or earlier 20s, when he started developing these ideas. He was steeped in, significantly, the poems of the English Romantics, Coleridge, one of the chief among them, Keats, the rest of them. And he had that certainty that went around understanding his own sensibility in terms of that romantic poetry, and a deep knowledge of Buddhism itself. He was a voracious scholar, but he didn't get stuck in the details. I'm doing a very, very crude summary of his approach, but he seems from a very early stage to have been able to see past the details to the spirit of the Buddhist teaching, and to have had a great confidence in allowing that to find expression in terms of other systems, including the romantic poetry and the insights of Wordsworth and Coleridge in this case, and in marshalling to that end the philosophy of Plato. Plato, let me see, where's the quote? To begin from the beauties of earth and mount upwards for the sake of that other beauty, ideal beauty, using these, the beauties of earth, as steps only. And I've forgotten which Plato text this comes from, sorry. And from one going on to two, and from two to all fair forms, and from fair forms to fair practices, taking in more and more of the beauty of the world. And from fair practices to fair notions, from behavior to ideas. And from fair notions, one arrives at the notion of absolute beauty, and at last knows what the essence of beauty is, that life above all others which man should live in the contemplation of beauty absolute. And Plato believed that one could move towards the highest good by constantly broadening and refining one's pursuit of beauty. Now, we have to be careful here in talking about Plato's ideal forms. From the Buddhist point of view, this ideal beauty is not to be found existing anywhere in another dimension, in another place. There is no beauty except the beauty in things that are perceived as beautiful. We don't reify the beauty. It's not a god, it's not a place, it's not anywhere else. And yet there is the ideal of beauty. Based on our limited experience of the beautiful things, we can reach in our imagination for the awareness of complete beauty. That, I hope that's a fair paraphrase of Bhante Sangharakshita's philosophy of the matter. We can reach in our imagination for the awareness of complete beauty, or complete awareness of beauty, the same awareness in which a Buddha dwells. But that's the link. I'm not sure if I've skipped over a few pages there because I was running late, and I hope that hangs together. Please ask me if it doesn't. That's one side of it. That's beauty up there before us as an ideal towards which we work. But there's another complementary aspect, as it's explained by another of our teachers, Dharmachari Subhuti. He explains it here in relation to the desire for another human being, but it holds generally as well. There is eros, Eros doesn't just apply to the attraction to another human being in this context, in Plato's sense. Eros is the name of the Greek god of desire, the personification of desire. In the Platonic scheme of things, though, that desire goes through 3 stages, the last of which is Eros, properly speaking. First, there's the level of talking about attraction between beings. There's the level of animal necessity, the birds and the bees, and the forces they instinctively obey. And then there's the human level, at which desire becomes bound up, entangled with our self-awareness, our self-delusion. We think and behave like a permanent me, desiring a permanent other, and craving what we think will consolidate our sense of ourself, is how Subhuti explains it, even as we know deep down that it can't. And that's where we get into trouble, into the divine madness of Eros. And finally, in this Platonic progression, there's the desire for other, which is based on ourself, is transcended. And we go on to the desire for other as representing something more, something beyond this sense of self separate from other. It becomes very difficult to put words on this, obviously. And at that stage, the other is what we've been calling the ideal of beauty, the beauty towards which Plato has been laying out our path, the path that Sangharakshita takes over or takes on board as the model for the Buddhist spiritual path. He implies that progression. In his approach, which applies to, as I say, to all desire, not just the desire for another human being, each level of desire leads to the next. So we start off with animal desire. We go on into the complicated human desire, where we get it wrong because we think of ourselves as self-wanting other person, and that ends in tears. Long digression would be possible here. We are not saying, nobody says that attraction to another human being, relationship with another human being is a recipe for disaster. We could, that would be a whole other discussion. The point is that that level of desire has to be situated in an awareness of the whole scheme of things. We all function at the animal level. We can't help but function at the animal level. We all function at the human level. We all can function at the level of Eros, at the ideal level. That's the scheme. So each level of desire leads to the next. We start with animal desire, and the lower can only be let go of when the higher is attained. You don't just cut away your desire for at the animal level because you have found a higher form of attraction. It's organic. They flow one into the other. And practice, this means, and that's where the link comes between, and this is difficult, but you can't let go of the one until you find the other. And that's where the moment of translucence comes in. In this at this mundane level of desire, you catch a glimpse of something closer to the beautiful. You refine your sense of the beautiful to the point where you are being led constantly to more and more adequate manifestations of beauty. It's a lovely idea, if I'm getting it across at all. The idea that I could, yes, this is beautiful. Yes, this is inspiring. Yes, this is going in the right direction. But there is somewhere, there's a moment, there's a glimpse of something closer to the ideal that leads us on. And for Sangharakshita, art was a huge part in that. Subhuti talks about the relationship with art, and I hope I can get this right, as being a dialogue between our sensibilities and the possibilities that it offers. Watching our own responses to art, we learn to locate, to have a sure sense of our grasp of the beautiful, where it is there in our own sensibility, and we can build on that in the dialogue with art. It's feeding into that, and we're learning about where our possibilities for advancement along the path lie. Stop me there. Does anyone get that? Because I am aware of doing a slight violence to that argument, but I think it's all. If it's all right, if it's on board in even a crude form, I'll go on. But if anyone's bothered, yeah, all right. Gosh, yeah, this stuff. Sana Deva put me onto this years ago, and it blew my mind then, and still, even today, hastily reading over my notes, I was going, it's amazing. Now, we've been talking in terms of the beautiful, of refining our sense of the beautiful. We need to look at the word beautiful, as I suggested earlier. I mean, not all works of art that are produced, a lot of works of art produced in the last century are not beautiful in any easy sense of the word. Actually would not have had much time for the paintings of Francis Bacon. These contorted, dreadful forms. He wouldn't have admitted him to the Pantheon. And I've heard works of new music which were literally painful. Yeah. And I mean literally, I think it was 3 or maybe 4 electric guitars with the music turned up to Spinal Tap levels in a room this size. Oh, I don't know, about twice the size of this. Just hard. Really hard. But that was part of the idea, because the composer was playing with the overtones, the harmonics that are produced, when sounds are combined. They're there anyway, but they were being combined in the music in a controlled way by him. You could see where he was at. But I spent too long trying to mind my ears with headphones on that to be able, I had to leave the room. But oft when on my couch I lie, that there was something changed, something shifted in my appreciation of music and my understanding was in a small way. So we have to make a little bit of room in our definition of art and the beautiful. Maybe modify Subhuti's definition and make it so instead of thinking of it as a dialogue between us and the beautiful in art, it seems to me, to modify that just a little bit and make it a dialogue between us and the beautiful and the repulsive in art. That would, I think, inform the sensibility and educate the sensibility just as well. And it would always lead towards the positive. The point about the repulsive is that it is not the beautiful, I think, in a way that the beautiful is beautiful because it's not the repulsive. I think the beauty is the positive principle. And always in Sangharakshita, always it's the positive. That's the really radical aspect of his teaching, is that the influence of the early monastics keeping manners on the young monks and curbing their appetites, which colors a lot of the negative training aspects, subdue the senses or keep the senses in check, guard the senses. All that. That's all there in Bhakti's teaching, but he balances with this, contemplate the beautiful. Don't just go to the graveyard, contemplate corpses. contemplate the beautiful. I'm going to have to finish. It's time, I think. I got through about 17 pages of 25, but I'll finish with Khalil Gibran. And the poet said, "Speak to us of beauty." And he answered, "Where shall ye seek beauty? And how shall you find her unless she herself be your way and your guide? And how shall you speak of her except she be the weaver of your speech? The aggrieved and the injured say, beauty is kind and gentle. Like a young mother half shy of her own glory, she walks among us. And the passionate say, nay, beauty is a thing of might and dread. Like the tempest, she shakes the earth beneath us and the sky above us. The tired and weary say beauty is soft whisperings. She speaks in our spirit. Her voice yields to our silences like a faint light that quivers in fear of the shadow. But the restless say, we have heard her shouting among the mountains. And with her cries came the sound of hoofs and the beating of wings and the roaring of lions. At night the watchmen of the city say, beauty shall rise with the dawn from the east. And at noontide the toilers and the wayfarers say, we have seen her leaning over the earth from the windows of the sunset. In winter, say the snowbound, she shall come with the spring leaping upon the hills. And in summer heat, the reapers say, we have seen her dancing with the autumn leaves, and we saw a drift of snow in her hair. All these things have you said of beauty. Yet in truth, you spoke not of her, but of needs unsatisfied. And beauty is not a need, but an ecstasy. It is not a mouth thirsting nor an empty hand stretched forth, but rather a heart inflamed and a soul enchanted. It is not in the image you would see, nor the song you would hear, but rather an image you see though you close your eyes, and a song you hear though you shut your ears. It's not the sap within the furrowed bark, nor a wing attached to a claw, but rather a garden forever in bloom, and a flock of angels forever in flight. People of Orphalese, beauty is life when life unveils her holy face. But you are life, and you are the veil. Beauty is eternity gazing at itself in a mirror. But you are eternity, and you are the mirror.
Wow. Oh, what to say after that? Just a very big thank you to Dayasagara for such an amazing talk, which really evoked this path of beauty. And I suppose particularly for people who are Buddhist practitioners or spiritual practitioners, just evoking this idea of the path of beauty as a means towards transcending craving, transcending that boundary between self and other. Yeah, really amazing. And I think one of the many things that stayed with me was just how you evoke this idea of how the line between the secular and the sacred can be so blurred. Like the image of the poet and the pastor, this even mythical poet and pastor in Times Square, who are both engaged in the same task, and really, I suppose, bringing to mind, how important it is the arts are for spiritual practice. I mean, there's loads I could evoke there. These moments of sorry. I think we had some moments of translucence, I think, as you were evoking there throughout that. So in a way, I suppose we probably have to carry this offering that you've made to us with us this evening and unpack it a little bit more. But yeah, thank you so much. And maybe we'll have another round of applause for that. But I'm going to be I might be looking up what once was a man from Nantucket.
He kept all his cash in a bucket. His daughter named Nan ran away with a man. And as for the bucket, Nan took it.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks. There we go. That's better to hear it from you than reading it online. So just one more event for Culture Night. We have a mantra chanting workshop at 9, so you're very welcome to stay for that if you'd like to. There'll be tea and coffee outside if you want some, from after this. But just to mention a couple of events, you'll have a leaflet that was probably sitting on your chair when you came here. So if you're interested in finding out a bit more about the Dublin Buddhist Centre, there'll be a bit about that in our community. And also in that, there's a flyer of upcoming events. So these are all suitable for newcomers. So of those, I just want to draw your attention to 2. One of which is a writing workshop, an online writing workshop that you might be interested in. It's not, it won't be the level of Coleridge or Keats or anything like that. You know, you don't have to share your writing, but it's a chance to, well, I suppose in a way, practice what Dayasagara was talking about, this quality of attention that we can bring to things. So that will be something that'll be happening on the 12th of October for 5 weeks. And then the other one is just to mention, as a course, if you're really inspired by all of this and you'd like to know a bit more about Buddhism, there's a course starting on Monday, which is called Breaking Through to Buddhahood. And that will be kind of exploring, how do we work in our Buddhist life? How do we move towards enlightenment? So you can find out more about that. Like I say, it's on the leaflet, but just throw those 2 in there in the mix. But thank you again, and hopefully see you. You might stay for the next workshop. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening.